After kicking my cheating wife out, her affair partner showed up, leading to a violent confrontation. The moment she walked out of the house, I thought I would finally find peace. The betrayal was crushing, but at least the silence would give me time to heal. I had caught her in the act, with him, her affair partner, the one she had been lying about for months. I never expected things to spiral out of control this quickly. Just as I was trying to put my life back together, the doorbell rang. I opened it, only to come face to face with the man who had taken everything from me. There he stood, as bold as ever, ready to confront me like it was no big deal. He didn't expect what came next. What happened next was not just about him. It was about my pride, my family, and the way I had let myself become a victim for far too long. This encounter was just the beginning of a violent confrontation that would change everything. Stick around. You will not want to miss how this intense situation played out. When I first met her, everything seemed perfect. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Beautiful, smart, and ambitious. We spent years building a life together, a family, and a future. We were the kind of couple everyone admired, at least on the surface. Our home was warm and filled with laughter, and our friends would always comment on how lucky we were. But as with many stories that look perfect from the outside, there were cracks beneath it all. I never suspected anything. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I trusted her completely. We had built our lives together, and I believed that we could weather any storm. But the storm came, not in the form of an argument or a disagreement, but in the form of a secret, one she had kept from me for months. It all started one evening when I noticed a shift in her behavior. She was distant, almost cold. At first, I thought it was just stress from work or the daily grind of life. But when I came across a text message that didn't make sense, I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. My mind raced as I confronted her, and in that moment, everything came crashing down. She admitted it. She had been seeing someone else, a man from her past, a childhood friend she reconnected with online. She tried to explain it away, but it didn't matter. The trust was broken, and there was no coming back from that. I asked her to leave. I couldn't bear to look at her anymore. The pain was unbearable, and all I wanted was to be alone to process what had happened. But what I didn't expect was what would happen next. Her affair partner wasn't some random person she had met at work or at a bar. No, this man was someone from her childhood, someone she had known long before I even entered the picture. They had reconnected on social media, rekindling an old friendship that, unbeknownst to me, had turned into something more. For months, I had been oblivious, thinking our life was normal, thinking everything was fine. But behind my back, they were making plans, meeting up, and exchanging messages filled with emotions that should have been reserved for me. I had always trusted her, but I never thought she would betray me like this. I guess I was naive. The day she confessed to me was the day my world shattered. She tried to justify her actions, telling me that she had been feeling lonely and neglected. But nothing could excuse what she had done. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. I had always prided myself on being a good husband, someone who put my family first, someone who believed in loyalty and honesty. But now, I was forced to confront the fact that I had been lied to for months. It hurt more than I could ever put into words. So, I made the decision to kick her out. I had to regain control over my life, even if it meant losing her. But as soon as I thought I had regained some semblance of peace, my life was about to be turned upside down once again. The days after I kicked her out were an emotional whirlwind. I went through every possible feeling: anger, sadness, disbelief, wondering how I had missed the signs. How had I been so blind? My mind was filled with a constant barrage of questions. What went wrong? Did she ever truly love me? Was everything I thought we had built just a lie? I began going through her things, not with the intention of invading her privacy, but to understand what had happened. I needed answers. I had a right to know why our life, our family, was falling apart. As I sifted through the papers, pictures, and personal items, I found several things that gave me chills. The first was a letter, tucked deep inside a drawer. It was from him, the man who had broken our marriage. It was long, filled with words of affection and longing. They spoke about the times they had shared as children, how they had lost touch, and how fate had brought them back together. But as I read on, the words became more intimate. They confessed their feelings for one another. There were mentions of late-night phone calls and promises to meet up, but most painfully, there was a note about how she wished I was never around, so she could truly be with him. That was the final blow. She had been planning this for months, and I had been none the wiser. Then there were the messages. Hundreds of texts and emails exchanged between the two of them, sent from her phone in the dead of night. In these messages, she wasn't the woman I knew. She was someone else, someone who was lying to my face every day. As I scrolled through their conversations, I saw how they had planned their secret meetings, their stolen moments of passion. There were photos of them together, smiling, laughing, holding hands. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I could feel the weight of every word, every image, sinking in deeper. But the worst part of all was seeing the messages where she spoke about her family. The family I had fought so hard for. She had told him that she didn't love me anymore, that she felt trapped in a life she never asked for. She spoke of her frustrations with our relationship, of how she no longer felt desired or appreciated. It made me question everything. Had I been so neglectful? Had I missed the signs? Still, none of it made sense. We had a family. We had children. We had built a life together. How could she just throw it all away? I was desperate to understand her perspective, but the answers I found only left me with more pain. One evening, I found myself in front of my computer, staring at the social media accounts where they had reconnected. I read through their posts, the ones she had shared with him, words of nostalgia and longing. I noticed how she had been sneaking around, not only with him, but with others as well. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. She had been hiding so many things from me. I felt sick to my stomach, but in a way, I felt relief too. At least now, I knew the truth. I knew who she had become. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to move on. I had to reclaim control over my life and my future, for my sake and for the sake of our children. But even though I had found the proof, even though I knew what I had to do, I still couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. It was clear now that the person I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, had not only been unfaithful, but had also deceived me in the worst way. And as I sat there, reading those heartbreaking words, I realized that this wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about who she truly was, and I couldn't be with someone who had deceived me like this. With the evidence in hand, I knew I had to confront her. But as I would later learn, confronting her was just the beginning of an even more painful journey, one that would lead to a violent confrontation with her affair partner. The day I finally confronted her was one of the hardest days of my life. I had gathered everything, the texts, the letters, the photos, and I knew I had to face her, no matter how much it hurt. She had been gone for a few days, but I was certain she had no idea what I had uncovered. I waited for her to return, hoping that the confrontation would bring some closure, some understanding of why she had done this to us. When she walked through the door, I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She had no idea that I knew everything. Her smile was faint, as though she expected me to react in a way that would be familiar, maybe an apology, maybe a plea for understanding. But that was not going to happen. I was done being the fool. I know, I said, the words heavy in the air. She froze in her tracks. Her face drained of color as I stepped toward her, holding up the letter from her lover. I know everything. I know about him. I know what you've been doing behind my back. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. Then, she let out a shaky breath, almost as if she were about to confess. Please, just let me explain, she said, her voice quivering. But I was done listening to her excuses. There was no explanation that could make this better. There was no justification for the hurt she had caused. I showed her the proof. One by one, I handed her the pictures, the messages, the emails. I could see the shame in her eyes as she took them in, but there was also a certain anger that began to grow in her. Anger toward me for uncovering her secrets. It was a mix of regret and resentment, but it was clear to me now that her actions had never been about me or our family. They had always been about her own selfish desires. Why? How could you do this to us? I asked, my voice filled with pain. But she couldn't answer. She just stood there, unable to face the truth of her own actions. I had always trusted her. I had always believed in us. And yet, here I was betrayed in the worst way possible. The silence between us grew thick, suffocating. I had hoped for an apology, or at least an explanation, but all I got was guilt and defensiveness. She told me that I never paid enough attention to her, that I was always too busy with work, that I hadn't been there for her the way she needed. But that was nothing more than an excuse, a feeble attempt to shift the blame. She had made the choice to cheat. No one had forced her into it. Then came the part one had been dreading, the moment when I knew I had to make the hardest decision of all. I told her to leave. I told her that I could not be with someone who had broken my trust in such a deep, irreparable way. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved, was no longer the person standing before me. She cried. She begged. She promised that things would change, that she would work to fix what she had broken. But I couldn't bring myself to believe her. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything she had hidden from me. It was about the lies, the deceit, and the emotional manipulation. She had taken everything from me, and I could not allow myself to stay in that toxic environment. As she gathered her things, I saw a familiar face at the window. The man, the one who had taken my wife away from me. He was standing there, watching. He had been waiting for this moment, and now that it had arrived, he couldn't hide any longer. At that moment, the rage inside me flared up. I had been calm up until then, holding it all in, but now, seeing him there, knowing what he had done, I could feel the anger boiling over. I stormed to the door and flung it open. There he was, standing on the other side, his face filled with a mixture of nervousness and defiance. He knew why I was angry. He knew what he had done to my family. Get out of here, I spat, my fist clenched. You have no place in my life, in my home. You've taken everything from me. His response was not what I expected. Instead of backing down, he pushed me, hard. And just like that, the confrontation escalated. My mind went blank in that moment. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I just know that the next few seconds felt like a blur of violence, anger, and regret. We struggled, pushing and shoving each other as our anger spilled over into a physical confrontation. It was primal, something I had never imagined myself involved in. But in that moment, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending my dignity, my family, and everything I had worked so hard to build. It didn't last long. One of the neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. The officer arrived just in time to break us apart. Both of us were physically shaken, bruised from the altercation, but it was nothing compared to the emotional damage that had been done. As the officer led him away, I stood there, breathless, heart racing, wondering if this was the end of everything. My wife was gone, and now, the man who had come into my life to destroy was gone too. But I knew deep down that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. I had taken control of my life, and no one was going to take that away from me. In the days following that violent confrontation, everything seemed to shift. I felt a strange combination of relief and emptiness. The anger that had fueled me during the confrontation was fading, but in its place, there was a deep sadness. A sadness not just for what I had lost, but for the family that we could never be again. The woman I had loved for years, the one who had stood by my side through so much, had betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. I had hoped to rebuild, but I knew now that the foundation of trust between us had been shattered beyond repair. The first few nights after she left were the hardest. The house felt too quiet, too empty. The memories of our life together echoed through every room, reminding me of what had been, and what would never be again. I had always believed that we were a team, that we could face anything as long as we were together. But that illusion had been destroyed, leaving nothing but the harsh reality of betrayal. I tried to focus on the things that mattered, my children, my work, myself. I knew that I had to keep going, no matter how much it hurt. The kids were my anchor. They needed me now more than ever, and I couldn't afford to fall apart. I made sure they were doing okay, even if I wasn't sure how to be okay myself. I kept a brave face for them, trying to shield them from the fallout of the mess their mother had left behind. But there were days when the anger crept back in. The thought of her with him, the man who had torn our family apart, was a constant ache. I couldn't understand how she could have done it, how she could have gone so far, not only breaking my heart but dragging my children into this mess. I had so many questions, so many things I needed answers to. But I also knew that getting those answers wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the damage. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. I spent hours thinking about everything that had led to that moment. The moments when I should have noticed the signs, when I should have asked the right questions, when I should have been more present in her life. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was moving forward. The confrontation had forced me to face the truth, and the truth was simple. I couldn't let her back into my life. I had to protect myself and my children from the chaos she had brought into our world. It wasn't easy, especially when the kids asked where their mother was. They didn't understand what had happened, and I wasn't sure how to explain it to them. I didn't want to paint their mother in a negative light, but I couldn't lie to them either. So I kept it simple. I told them that their mother had made some mistakes, and for now, she needed to work on fixing them. There were moments when I considered reaching out to her, when the pain of it all felt overwhelming, when I missed the companionship we had once shared. But each time I stopped myself. I had already made the decision. There was no going back. I wasn't going to let the person who had betrayed me destroy my sense of self-worth. I wasn't going to let her dictate my happiness any longer. As the days turned into weeks, I began to rebuild. Slowly, at first, but with a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. I started going to therapy, not just for myself, but for my children too. I wanted to be sure that we all processed the emotions of what had happened in a healthy way. I realized that healing wasn't going to happen overnight, but I was committed to it. I owed it to myself and to my children to give them a better future than the one their mother had tried to create. My work became a focus for me, and I threw myself into it like never before. I had always been dedicated, but now it felt like it was the one thing that gave me control. It allowed me to channel my energy into something productive, something that had nothing to do with the heartbreak I was carrying. I took on new projects, set new goals, and began to see progress in ways I hadn't before. I felt a sense of accomplishment, even in the face of such personal turmoil. I also made new connections, friendships that were based on trust and honesty, something that had been sorely lacking in my marriage. I found support in unexpected places, people who had gone through similar struggles, and they helped me realize that I wasn't alone. That was one of the most important lessons I learned in the aftermath. There was life after betrayal. There was a future worth fighting for. Months went by, and I began to see the effects of the changes I had made. I was stronger, more self-assured, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly living for myself. My children, too, seemed to be adjusting. They were still sad, still confused, but they were coping. We were coping. Then one day, I received a call from her. It had been weeks since the confrontation, and I had almost forgotten that she still existed in my world. She told me she was sorry. She said that she regretted everything, that she had made a huge mistake, and that she wanted to come home. But I wasn't the same man who had once begged her to stay. I wasn't the same man who had been willing to forgive her. I had moved on, not just physically, but emotionally too. I told her I had no place for her in my life anymore. The person she had been was gone. The man I had become didn't need her. I needed to protect my peace, my dignity, and the future I was building. I told her I would always be there for the kids, but that was it. We were done. The phone call ended, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't the closure I had once dreamed of, but it was the closure I needed. I had reclaimed control of my life, and no one was going to take that away from me. If you found this story compelling, do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon to stay updated with more stories.